Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're going to be looking closer at the YouTube video you sent over, the one with Dr. Hammad Lakhvi talking about Islamic end times prophecies. You mentioned wanting to understand more about the geopolitical side of it all, so let's get into that.
Okay, sounds good. I think a good place to start would be with the term Asham. Dr. Lakhvi mentioned it a few times.
Right, right.
And it's not just some random geographical region. It's not just, like Jordan and Syria. It actually has really deep spiritual meaning in Islamic tradition. And this is especially true when you're talking about, the end times.
Yeah, and that whole part about angels casting their shade upon Asham, that was really interesting.
Yeah.
What exactly does that imagery mean, and why is that region, why is Asham so important in these prophecies?
That's a great question. So, the imagery of angel casting shave is often interpreted as like a symbol of divine protection and blessing. It basically means that Asham is considered sacred land, chosen by God for specific events, like the events that lead up to the Day of Judgment. And a lot of Islamic texts, they predict that major events, like the appearance of the Mahdi in the final battles, are all supposed to happen within Asham.
Okay, so we're not just talking about borders on a map.
Exactly.
This is a spiritually important location where it is believed that these prophecies will actually unfold.
Exactly.
And speaking of the Mahdi, Dr. Lakhvi seemed to connect the current state of the Muslim world, with his arrival.
Hmm.
What is the connection there?
Well, a lot of people believe that the Mahdi will emerge during a time of like a lot of turmoil and division within the Muslim world. He's seen as, a guided leader, one who will unite Muslims and bring about justice and peace. And Dr. Lakhvi was basically saying that, the current political instability, like right now, and, the desire for strong leadership within the Muslim community, well, they kind of match up with the descriptions in the prophecies, the ones about the Mahdi appearing.
Right, it's almost like the world is setting the stage for this prophesied figure to come in.
Exactly.
Now, in the video, Dr. Lakhvi also brings up this idea of a greater Israel expanding across the region. Can you explain that a bit more? Like, how does greater Israel fit into these prophecies?
Yeah, that's an important thing to talk about for sure. Islamic prophecies do predict Jewish control over Jerusalem and also that there's going to be a final battle against them. But the thing is, and this is what Dr. Luckley was getting at, the prophecies don't actually say, what the boundaries of this greater Israel would be.
Oh, I see. So there's room for interpretation and maybe even debate about how far this greater Israel would actually extend.
Right.
I imagine that causes some concern.
Yeah.
Did Dr. Lockby have anything to say about that? Like how to deal with all this uncertainty and the potential for conflict?
He did. He talked about how it's important to not just, understand the prophecies intellectually, but to really think about what they might mean practically and how they could impact our lives. He really pushed for a more proactive approach, like, focusing on both physical and spiritual preparation for whatever might happen in the future.
Now, you just said physical preparation. What did he mean by that? In the context of these prophecies, what does physical preparation actually look like?
Well, he was talking about the importance of learning skills and, developing a mindset that would be helpful in tough times. And that could be practical things like self-defense or being ready if there are like, disruptions to resources. But it's also about developing a resilient mindset, the ability to adapt to change and, being okay with stepping outside of your comfort zone.
So it's not just about stockpiling supplies or anything. It's about really building inner strength and a willingness to face whatever challenges come up.
Yeah, exactly. It's about being prepared on your own and recognizing that the things we do today, they have an impact on, how we'll deal with things in the future, whatever those things might be.
That reminds me of something else Dr. Loxley talked about, the qualities of the Mahdi himself. He said that the Mahdi is supposed to be a strong and capable leader, someone who can unite and guide Muslims through really difficult times. And it seems like that's connected to what we're saying here, like cultivating those same qualities within ourselves.
Absolutely. It's like we're being asked to, in a way, embody a little bit of the Mahdi spirit to become like a source of strength and guidance, for ourselves and the people around us. Even when things are tough, it really emphasizes that these prophecies aren't just about watching and waiting, but about doing something, about actively trying to make the world a better place.
That's really powerful. So even though these prophecies might seem to be about, future conflicts and challenges, they also have a message about personal responsibility and the power of what individuals can do.
Exactly. And I think that message is so important today, especially now when it's so easy to feel overwhelmed by all the information out there. and all the different opinions. It reminds us that we can actually do things to prepare and maybe even help create a better outcome.
So you mentioned earlier that these processes can sometimes make people feel anxious
Right.
or confused.
Yeah.
How can someone deal with those feelings?
That's such an important question. I think one of the most important things Dr. Lakhvi said was that even when we feel uncertain, we can still have hope. Islamic teachings say that it's important to trust in God's plan, even if we don't completely understand it. It's about finding a kind of peace inside yourself and letting your faith be your guide through the unknown.
So it's not about ignoring those feelings of anxiety, but finding a way to balance them with trust and faith.
Exactly. And remember, these prophecies, they're not meant to scare us. They're supposed to guide us to do good. It's about focusing on what we can control our own choices and what we do, and understanding that we have a part to play in what the future will be, no matter what challenges come up.
That's a really good point. It's easy to focus on the potentially negative parts of prophecies,
Yeah,
but really they're supposed to make us more proactive and engaged in our own lives and in working towards a better future.
right.
Now, we've talked a lot about how Islam views these end times prophecies. But what about other religions, like Christianity? Did Dr. Lafke mention that at all?
Yeah, he did. He briefly talked about this idea that Muslims and Christians might team up against a common enemy. Some Islamic traditions hint at that. It suggests that, even though these two faiths are different, there might be a point where they come together, if they face a bigger threat.
Oh, interesting. So even though the prophecies seem to be about conflict, there's also a chance for people to work together across different religions. That's kind of hopeful.
It is, and it reminds us that, we don't know for sure what's going to happen. The choices we make individually and together can really change how these prophecies might unfold.
It's kind of amazing to think about. Now, one thing that stood out to me was that Dr. Lakhvi said we shouldn't get fixated on dates or on, one specific interpretation of these prophecies. He was kind of warning us about getting too caught up in those little details.
Yeah, you're right. He reminded us that only God truly knows when and how these events will happen. Trying to figure out the exact date or taking the prophecies too literally, well, it can cause anxiety and it distracts from the main message.
Right, right. So we need to be informed and aware of these prophecies,
Yes,
but we also need to recognize that we don't know everything.
exactly. We need to be humble about it because, how we interpret things, it's influenced by who we are. We're given these prophecies as guidance to remind us of things, but they're not like a step-by-step plan for the future.
So instead of getting stuck on, when these things will happen and how they'll happen, we should really focus on the message, the importance of faith, of being strong and striving to do what's right.
Exactly. It's much more important to understand those lessons and those values than to get lost in the details of when they might happen. It's about the core message, not about, how spectacular it might be.
Did Dr. Lockley give any advice on, how to build that inner strength
Hmm.
and spiritual preparedness?
He did. He talked about the power of certain prayers, those asking for protection and guidance in difficult times. It's not just about preparing physically, it's also about making that connection with the divine stronger, finding peace in our religious practices.
So it's acknowledging that real strength comes from within
Right.
and that our faith is what's truly important, especially when we're facing hard times. Did he give any examples of practices or resources for people who might be new to all this?
Yeah, he suggested finding teachers and scholars within Islam, people who can offer guidance. And he also said it's good to study the Quran and the Hadith, the collections of what the Prophet Muhammad said and did, to really understand Islamic teachings about the end times.
So it's about actively looking for knowledge
Yes,
and guidance from within the Islamic tradition and from people who are experts in this.
exactly. And it's about taking what we learn and making it part of our lives. Through prayer, thinking about what it all means, and trying to live by what we believe.
I like that. It changes things from just waiting passively to actually engaging with our faith and
Yeah.
working on ourselves. It feels more powerful, not as scary.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It reminds us that even when prophecies talk about big global events, there's still a very important message about personal faith and growing spiritually. That's something that can speak to anyone, no matter what they believe.
It's a universal truth that when times are uncertain, we find strength by connecting to something bigger than ourselves,
Hmm.
whether it's through religion or spirituality or just by connecting with what we believe in. That inner guide can help us through tough times.
Yeah, I agree. And that brings us back to Dr. Loxley's main point that even though these prophecies can seem scary sometimes, they ultimately give us a chance to make our faith stronger, to build up our inner strength, and to become the best versions of ourselves.
It's recognizing that we can face challenges and grow from them and embracing that journey with a sense of purpose and resilience.
Yeah, that's it exactly. These prophecies, they're not just about predicting the future, they're about encouraging us to live more meaningful lives right now, in the present, regardless of what might happen later.
That's a really powerful takeaway for our listener.
Thinking back to where we left off, I think we should go a little deeper into this whole idea of getting ourselves ready, being prepared. Especially since Dr. Lakhvi seemed to really stress that point. It's easy to talk about these big prophecies, but what can people actually do to prepare? I mean, like, what if these events did even happen in our lifetime?
That's a good point. It can be overwhelming, to think about global conflicts and prophecies. Did Dr. Laffey actually give any practical advice, like specific things people can do?
He did, and one of the things that really stuck with me was what he said about challenges, about stepping outside of our comfort zones. He said that actively looking for challenges, pushing ourselves, that's a big part of building resilience, the kind of resilience we might need in the future.
Interesting. So it's not just about sitting back and waiting for things to happen. It's about working on ourselves, becoming more adaptable. Did he give any examples of what that could look like?
Yeah, he mentioned things like learning new skills, practical stuff that could be useful in different situations, even things like, physical training or self-defense, not just for strength, but for discipline and confidence too.
Ah, so it's about being more resourceful, self-reliant, not just in a survival sense, but in a way that makes us better at facing whatever comes our way.
Right. It's about taking responsibility for our own preparedness and recognizing that what we do today affects how we'll handle things tomorrow, whatever those things are.
That makes me think of something else Dr. Lakhvi talked about, the qualities of the Mahdi. He talked about how the Mahdi is supposed to be a strong leader, someone who can bring Muslims together and guide them through tough times. It seems like there's a link there to what we're talking about now. Like we should try to develop those same qualities in ourselves.
Definitely. It's almost like we're supposed to kind of take on some of the muddy spirit, become strong and be a guide for ourselves and other, especially if things get difficult. It shows that these prophecies aren't just about watching and waiting. They're about actually doing something, trying to make the world a better place.
That's a powerful way to think about it. So even though these prophecies seem to be about, future conflicts and all these challenges, there's also a message about what we can do ourselves, about personal responsibility.
Exactly. And that message is really important right now. It's so easy to feel overwhelmed with everything that's going on, all the information, all the different opinions. But this reminds us that we can actually take steps to be ready and maybe even help make things better.
You said before that these prophecies can sometimes make people anxious
Yeah,
or even confused. How can someone deal with those feelings?
that's a great question. One of the most important things I took away from Dr. Lathvi was that even when we're not sure about things, we can still have hope. Islamic teachings tell us to trust in God's plan, even if we don't fully understand it. It's about finding that peace inside ourselves and letting our faith guide us through the unknown.
So it's not about ignoring those anxious feelings.
No,
It's about finding a balance between those feelings and our trust and faith.
right. And another thing to remember is that these prophecies aren't meant to scare us, they're meant to guide us towards doing good. It's about focusing on the things we can control, our own choices and actions, and realizing that we have a role to play in shaping the future, no matter what challenges might come up.
I really appreciate you pointing that out. It's easy to get caught up in the negative aspects of prophecies,
Mm,
but they're actually meant to push us to be more proactive, more involved in our own lives, and in making the world a better place.
absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the Islamic perspective on these end times prophecies, but did Dr. Lakhvi ever talk about other religions, like Christianity?
He did briefly. He mentioned the idea that Muslims and Christians might actually join forces to fight against a common enemy. There are hints about that in some Islamic traditions. It suggests that maybe, even though these faiths are different, they might find common ground if a bigger threat comes along.
Wow. So even amidst prophecies that seem to be about conflict, there's a chance for people to cooperate across different religions. That's a pretty hopeful thought.
It is. It reminds us that the future isn't set in stone. What we choose to do, both individually and as a group, can have a big impact on how these prophecies might play out.
It's pretty amazing to think about. One thing that really struck me was when Dr. Lockheed warned against getting fixated on specific dates or getting stuck on one specific interpretation. He said we shouldn't get too caught up in the details.
Yeah, he made a good point there. He reminded us that only God truly knows when and how these events will happen. Trying to figure out the exact date or taking the prophecies too literally, well, it can just make us more anxious, and it takes our focus away from what's really important.
So we need to stay informed, be aware of these prophecies,
Yes.
but also be humble and recognize that we don't have all the answers.
Exactly. We need to remember that how we understand these things is influenced by our own perspective. These prophecies are given to us for guidance, as reminders, but they're not like a detailed plan for the future.
So instead of focusing on the when and the how, we should be paying more attention to the message, the importance of faith, of being strong and resilient, and doing what's right.
Right, exactly. Understanding those lessons and values is way more important than getting lost in the details of when they might happen. It's about the core message, not the spectacle.
And speaking of the core message, did Dr. Lakhvi offer any advice on how to actually build that inner strength, that spiritual preparedness?
He did. He talked about the power of certain prayers, specifically those that offer protection and guidance during difficult times. It's not just about preparing physically, it's about strengthening our connection with the divine, finding peace through our religious practices.
So it's about acknowledging that true strength comes from within,
Yes.
and that nurturing our faith is so important, especially when facing potential adversity. Did he give any specific examples of practices or resources for people who are new to this?
He recommended seeking guidance from knowledgeable teachers and scholars within the Islamic tradition. He also encouraged studying the Quran and the Hadith, those collections of the Prophet Muhammad's sayings and actions, to really understand Islamic teachings about the end times.
So it's about actively seeking knowledge
Yes,
and guidance from within the Islamic tradition and from experts.
exactly. And it's about taking that knowledge and putting it into practice in our daily lives through prayer, reflection, and striving to live according to our values.
I really like that perspective. It shifts the focus from waiting to actually taking action, engaging with our faith, and working on our own personal growth. It feels empowering, not scary.
I agree. It's a good reminder that even when these prophecies talk about huge global events, there's still a powerful message about personal faith and spiritual growth, something that can resonate with anyone no matter what they believe.
It's a universal truth, isn't it? That in times of uncertainty, we find strength by connecting to something bigger than ourselves,
Hmm,
whether it's through religion, spirituality, or just connecting with our deepest values and purpose. That inner compass can guide us through challenging times.
you put that beautifully, and it brings us right back to what Dr. Lakhvi was saying, that these prophecies, as daunting as they can seem, they actually give us a chance to deepen our faith, to build up our inner strength, and become the best versions of ourselves.
It's about realizing that there's potential for both challenge and growth, and embracing that journey with purpose and resilience.
That's a great way to put it. These prophecies aren't just about predicting the future, they're about inspiring us to live more meaningful lives right now in the present, no matter what the future holds.
I think that's a very powerful message for our listener to take away from this deep dive. All this talk about prophecies and preparing for, uncertain times. It's got me thinking about something Dr. Loxley said about stepping out of our comfort zones. It's not just about physical challenges, is it?
No, no, not at all. It's about, broadening our perspective, challenging our own assumptions, being willing to confront like uncomfortable truths about ourselves and about the world around us. I think that's where real growth happens.
So it's like these prophecies, even though they talk about conflict and upheaval, they can also be seen as a way to change ourselves personally.
Exactly. Yeah. They make us ask those deeper questions, about our purpose, our values, how we really want to live. It's about finding that inner strength and that resilience, not just to survive tough times, but to actually thrive and to make the world a better place.
It's fascinating, isn't it? These prophecies, they focus on external events, but they also point us inwards towards this journey of self-discovery and, spiritual growth.
Yeah, that's it. And that journey is something we can all start no matter what the future holds. It's about developing compassion, wisdom, courage, those qualities that will always be helpful no matter what happens.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep
We
dive.
have.
We talked about the importance of the Levant, the concept of the Mahdi, the possibility of global conflict, and the importance of getting ourselves ready, physically and spiritually.
Yeah, we really dug into some complex ideas and different interpretations. We saw that these prophecies offer a lot of different perspectives on what the future might be like, and that we need to understand them on many levels.
And we also acknowledge that, these topics can make people feel anxious or uncertain. And we emphasize how important it is to find balance, seek knowledge, and strengthen our faith.
Yeah, and through all of that, we highlighted the empowering message that runs through these properties that even if there's potential for turmoil, we still have the power to shape a better future through our own choices and our own actions.
We discussed the importance of stepping outside of what makes us comfortable, embracing those challenges and becoming more resilient.
And we emphasize the importance of connecting with something bigger than ourselves, whether it's through religion, spirituality, or just really strong values. It's that connection that can give us strength and guidance when times are uncertain.
This deep dive has definitely given you a lot to think about. What really stuck with you? What questions or insights are you taking away from all this?
As we wrap up this deep dive, I think the most important thing to remember is that these prophecies aren't meant to fill us with fear or make us feel hopeless. They're meant to inspire us to live more consciously, with purpose and compassion.
We encourage you to keep exploring these prophecies and all the different ways people interpret them, to keep seeking knowledge and understanding.
Remember, even when the predictions seem daunting, there's always hope, there's always an opportunity to grow, and we always have the power as individuals to make choices that create a better future.
This has been a truly fascinating exploration,
Yes.
and we thank you for joining us on this deep dive.